You're listening to Zap Night, a video game review podcast. Join your hosts as we review video games from all systems and all genres. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Zap Night. I'm your host Danny, and we have Jinx back again. Jinx, how are you?
Pretty good, ready to talk about this.
Yeah, today we're talking about Resident Evil 2. So, it's been about a year since I played Resident Evil 1. I was excited, but nervous going into Resident Evil 2. I was expecting it to be a lot harder than it actually was. But I think that helped because I went into it expecting, this challenge, and then it was okay, this isn't so bad. I managed to get through it okay. But it's still got those classic tank controls, and it's fun. But I played the original PlayStation version. The one that I specifically played was the DualShock Analog Controller Edition. I do have the other one as well that doesn't have the DualShock on there. Not that it really matters much. I don't know if it changes at all between those two. What version did you play?
I played the GameCube version.
Do you know what's different between the two?
The only real difference is just the mapping of the buttons to the GameCube controller. Other than that, the game is the same. So yeah,
it was developed by Capcom. And it was released in 1998 for the PlayStation, and then it was ported out to the Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast in 2000. And then in 2003, they ported it out to the GameCube. And then they just did the remake of the game in 2019, which I haven't played. But I'll be curious to know what the major differences is, because I know that the first one, they did a remaster on the GameCube, and they changed a lot of the puzzles, so that's interesting. So, you want to try and go over the story?
Try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The game starts about 2 months after the events of Resident Evil 1. You see Leon, who is heading towards the police department for his first day of work, and you see Claire, who's heading to the police department looking for her brother. They end up finding each other and noticing that Raccoon City is completely overwhelmed by zombies. And in their attempt to escape, they get into a major car accident, and they get separated, where they both separately make their way to the police department, and they have their own versions of the same story. So this is what's cool about this game, is you can play as Leon or Claire with very similar gameplay, but different story and different aspects to the game as a whole. Like Leon, you start walking right into the front of the police department, where Claire, you're kind of going at it from the backside. So it's just neat, and it's interesting how the puzzles change, and we'll get more into that when we talk about the gameplay. But for Claire, when she heads into the police department, a tyrant gets dropped onto the police department via a helicopter from Umbrella, and chases Claire pretty much throughout the entire game. You find more about it a little later, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But she also runs into a little girl named Sherry. And Sherry is just this little kid who's just barely managing to stay alive. Actually, she does a little bit better than I did. And then Leon, he makes his way through the police department from the front doors, and he doesn't really get a whole lot of story development other than basic background information of what's going on. You get little bits and pieces of the G virus and people looking for the G virus, and the people who developed the G virus, which was William Birkin. So Leon, he makes his way straight through the police department and runs into Ada. She's looking for her boyfriend, John, who works for Umbrella. So, for whatever reason, I don't know if the Umbrella lab is super close to the police department or if it's supposed to be underground of the police department, But obviously the two are connected, and that's what Ada is there doing. She's looking for her boyfriend. Claire, while she's investigating the police department, we already kind of talked about Sherry, but she also runs into the chief of police, who is Iron.
Chief Irons.
Yeah. Chief Irons. He has held himself up in his office, and you start finding out that the chief has been covering up a lot of Umbrella stuff in Raccoon City, and really being like the front man for the cover up of everything going on in Umbrella, and also kind of being the gatekeeper to the lab that is kind of within the police department. It doesn't seem like a whole lot of people like him, but when you run into him as Claire, you find out that because of the mess that Umbrella has made in the city, he is bound determined to just kill everyone. Anyone who's still alive, anyone who has been working with him. He tries to kill Claire. He kills the mayor's daughter, who just happens to be in the study with him. I would assume that he was keeping her hostage or something similar. It's hard telling. But then, as he's trying to kill Claire, the tyrant shows up and knocks him into the sewer. And then I think a different monster then ends up killing him, right? It's the monster that William turns into.
Yeah, he attacks him, and a little sort of parasite guy is inside of Chief Irons after it and sort of busts out of him.
Really?
You don't remember Chief Irons having the chest burster thing?
No, I don't.
Oh, man.
I just remember Chief Irons falling down that sewer chute and then like his torso being spit back up out of the sewers, but I don't remember anything bursting out of him. I remember something bursting out of William.
Chief Irons, he had the embryo burst out of his chest.
I guess here's a good question. Did you play Claire's story first or Leon's story first?
I usually start with Claire's first.
See, I wonder if the story changes a little bit depending on who you play first.
It does a little bit, but not too much. Mainly, it's just the interaction between both. So, like, the weapons you choose,
Right.
or the items. So it's not too big of a difference. The main tyrants that you end up fighting against in Resident Evil 2 are the William Birkin tyrant and the tyrant that comes from the little guy that bursts out of Chief Irons. And Mr. X is a tyrant, technically.
Mr. X?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Do you remember the guy, the obviously monster guy with like the big coat and hat that walks around with the pale face?
Oh, yeah. That's the one that falls from the helicopter.
Yeah, that's Mr. X.
Gotcha.
He's the one that was sent in. So you go up against a few tyrants in this one. They had so many enemies in this one, it was great.
So Claire and Sherry head down towards the sewers. Leon also is kind of heading towards the sewers around the same time. They do have some times where they bump into each other. For example, in the Stars like room where Chris would have been and Jill would have been, they find it empty, and they find that Chris isn't at the police department. He's off doing something else. So it kind of turns into Claire and Leon just need to make it out of Raccoon City to try and avoid this zombie apocalypse that they found themselves in. So while they make their way to the sewer, again, Leon finds Ada, and they run into William Birkin, who is the creator of the G-Virus. He's kind of distraught about the accident and the problems that he's caused, and he knows that Umbrella is searching for him to obtain the G-Virus. But he doesn't he inject himself with the G-Virus? He ends up turning into a monster that you fight later.
Right. He was on the verge of death and in his last moments decided that that was better. So he injected himself with the G virus and became a tyrant.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I remember the embryo coming out of William and going down into that room where you have to put the chess pieces in. And that's where you fight the like first boss with Leon in that room. And then as Claire, you go through that room, but there's nothing in there. And you don't actually have a decent boss fight until you go down the chute. After Iron dies, you go down the chute and you confront the tyrant who really looks like William.
So William Birkin, who was the scientist that did work for them, with his experiments, he did create the G virus. And obviously he feels ownership over it. He wants a say-so in what happens with it. Obviously, these things are being created for bioweapons, for military, basically. So William didn't want his work to be taken. And I guess, like, until he hands it over or they take it, it is still his. And he didn't want to give up ownership, basically. So that's why they went in there and tried to assassinate him and take all of what he made.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, Claire and Sherry has been tormented by this other tyrant that's been chasing them around. And you start to learn from... I think you learn mainly from Sherry's mom, right? Annette? Annette. And you find out that Sherry has been carrying around the G virus in her pendant this whole time. And the tyrant is looking for the G virus. That is its objective. So it's basically just been trolling you and stalking you this whole game to get that pendant. Claire ends up taking the pendant from Sherry and throwing it over the edge to avoid the tyrant getting a hold of it. And the tyrant that has been chasing Claire this whole time falls into this massive pit of molten metal. But Ada ends up picking up the pendant. Is it Ada or is it Annette who picks it back up?
I believe it's Ada.
He's interrupted by a hysterical Annette, who explains to him that Ada's relationship with John is only a means to get information about Umbrella.
There is no John, really.
Right. Annette tells Leon that Ada's a spy meant to steal the G virus from some unknown organization. And just as Annette is about to shoot Leon, the tyrant appears and she's forced to retreat. Ada returns to save Leon and battles the tyrant, which falls into the pit of molten metal. See, like, this stuff here, maybe I'm just not remembering Leon's part as well as I thought I did.
Yeah, the scenarios you can kind of get mixed up with sometimes if you haven't played them like over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, because you're not used to it. You only played one playthrough for each, right?
Right, yeah.
There's technically 4 stories in this, and they're similar but different, so it's easy to forget which character you did what with and at what time, because they like cross into each other and over, and they affect each other. So, I mean, you might not remember that you did something on Claire's scenario B and not Leon's scenario A or something.
Right, sure. So let's see. They make their way through the police department. They go into the sewer, where they kind of meet up with the first things of the tyrant, you know, with William and Ada. And then they kind of follow their way down into the laboratory where Ada gets wounded and Leon goes to find help for Ada. And in the process, running into Annette tells him that Ada's just a spy, When Leon goes back to check on Ada, she's gone. And during this time, Claire and Sherry are also down in the lab. And they're being chased around by this other tyrant. And in the power room, the tyrant smashes a power unit before falling into the molten lava, but that smashing of the power unit causes the facility to go into a self-destruct mode. So they're on this timer to then escape the facility. Both Leon and Claire, in both scenarios, this happens. On their way out, Leon runs into Ada, who is trying to get the G virus from Annette, and Annette ends up she ends up getting shot or something, right? By Leon, or is it by Ada?
Annette and Ada have sort of a standoff, and each does get wounded, but William ends up officially sort of finishing off Annette. She dies after her interaction with him.
How does Ada end up almost falling over the edge? I guess that's where I'm getting tripped up over.
They're on a platform in the air, and it sort of starts to like break away, and she ends up hanging off of it at one point.
Gotcha. So, Ada falls off this bridge. Leon then makes his way to the emergency exit, which ends up being this train. And he finds Claire down there. And then they escape on the train together. However, like backing up just a little bit, after the power thing with Claire and the alarm starts going off, Claire rushes to find Sherry, and they make their way down to the emergency hatch to activate the train. And I guess it depends on what scenario you pick. When do you do the missile launcher? For me, I did the missile launcher fight, the tyrant fight where you get the missile launcher from Ada. I did that with Claire, but I would assume that it's whoever had the B scenario. So, like, for me, when I played as Leon just, like, jumped on the train, and then they left. But then when I played as Claire actually turned the train on, and as she's turning the train on with this, like, timer ticking down, you have to fight one of the tyrants. And in the middle of this fight with the tyrant, Ada shows up and throws a rocket launcher down, and you shoot the tyrant with the rocket launcher, and then you board the train and start heading out of town.
Right.
So is the scenario different depending on who you play first?
It is, if it's the same file. So, like, if Claire is playing A and Leon's playing B, then in that same file, they're not going to both have that fight.
So would it be, if Leon was your second playthrough, does Leon then fight the tyrant with the rocket launcher?
If Claire did it first, I don't believe so.
I see. Well, in any case, they both get on the train that's heading out of town, and they get stopped once again by the big tyrant who is trying to stop the train. And for me anyway, Claire shoots a rocket at the tyrant once again, and it kills off the tyrant, stopping him from taking over the train. And Sherry manages to use the small windows to get into the train's controller port to stop the train from, I don't know, derailing or something super exciting and action-packed, and then the train comes to a stop just outside of town, and everyone is safe, and they decide to go their separate ways, where Claire is still trying to find Chris. And I don't know, what does Leon decide to do to see to try and find more information about Umbrella or the like?
Yeah, he decides he's going to pursue it more.
Sure. So hopefully we didn't butcher it too much. How do you feel about the story?
Honestly, I loved it. I mean, this story is sort of a follow-up to the first one, and the first one was great, but I feel like this one enhanced what the first one gave us. So it is very story rich. There's so much to do in this one. There's more enemies. And it's a little more complicated, isn't it? Because in the first one, you didn't have scenarios. And in this second one, each character has their scenario A and scenario B. So this game is pretty amazing with the story, in my opinion. There's a lot to it.
Right, yeah. It's really cool how they can take basically the same game and just retell it with a few tweaks and changes to make it a whole different experience. And I mean, it's not even just the story, but like the gameplay rolls into that too. But like, it makes sense, right? So like Leon, he's gonna run into different people at different times, and Claire's gonna run into different people at different times. So it's just neat to see both sides and then have it combined into one overall story. It's really a genius way to, one, extend what is kind of a short game to be a lot longer, because you need to play, at least one other time to get the full story. But also, just having so much story in there is really neat too. I mean, coming from Resident Evil 1 that had just a very linear storyline, and, you kind of have to dig for a lot of those details, to Resident Evil 2 that has a lot more, story heavy and really focusing on, trying to get you to figure out what's going on,
Right. Well, what I think the main difference is between the first and the second Resident Evil is the first one was just classically survival horror. There wasn't much else going on other than surviving. I mean, you get little information here and there, but for the most part, you're just surviving. However, Resident Evil 2, you're not just surviving, but there's all these other things in the story. There's mysteries. Like, what's up with Chief Irons? Who's that guy, that tyrant that keeps following us, Mr. X? Like, what's going on? Because in the first one, you were mainly inside of a mansion, and then you sort of go to a few other areas, but it was just sort of maintained in very small areas. This one, you're all over the city, you're in a factory, you're in a sewer, a police station, underground lab. You're all over the place, and there's just so much more to it. There's so many little side mysteries to solve while you're surviving. So it's just sort of like Resident Evil 1, but enhanced to the fullest. I think this is why Resident Evil 2 is one of the most beloved games in the franchise.
Sure. What I found interesting, when you're playing as Leon, you're seeing bits and pieces of Claire's story. And like, for example, you don't meet Chief Irons at all playing as, well, at least for me, playing as Leon. I didn't see him at all. In fact, I can't even get into that hallway as Leon.
Yeah, Chief Irons is exclusive to Claire's story.
Sure. So, and as you're playing Leon's side, and for me playing him first, I knew of Chief Irons. Like, I kind of understood that he was this kind of like gross guy and not doing very strange things around the police department. Like his secretaries, when you read some of the secretary notes, they talk about how gross of a guy he is and how mean he is, and how much that how much the secret of Umbrella is taking a toll on him through the time, I guess. I don't know how many, maybe years, I don't know. But you can tell that it starts stressing him out. And some of the notes from the people in the police department are saying, "Oh, Chief Irons has really been acting strange lately. He seems very stressed out, and normally he would really yell at me about leaning on this painting, but he didn't today, or whatever." But then when you play as Claire, you actually meet Chief Irons, and so I already had this background knowledge of, oh, it's this guy. And then when you finally get to meet him, you realize he really is this, like, disgusting guy that, from Leon's side, I already knew that he was this disgusting guy. And then on Claire's side, it's like validation. Yeah, he is this creep. So I wasn't too sad when he died.
You knew he was gonna die. He was meant to die. He was a sick guy, for sure.
I didn't like Sherry at all. And she felt like...
You didn't like Ashley in Resident Evil 4 either,
That's
right?
true, yeah. But I kind of feel like Sherry was worse as a character than Ashley. Like, Ashley was annoying, yes. And Ashley, just made the game more difficult. Where Sherry, didn't really add much to the game, and she was just annoying. Plus, so you actually get to play with both Sherry and Ada. And Sherry, you're not given any weapons or anything, so it's a little more stressful when you're going through, those little areas trying to avoid the zombies as Sherry, because you're defenseless. It's amazing she survived.
Yeah. Well, it definitely gives you a scare factor. It's kind of scary. You're this little girl, you can't really do too much, and you're running past all these zombies and stuff. That's pretty scary. I'd say that's a lot scarier than... when you were controlling Ashley in Resident Evil 4, because at least then you sort of could throw lamps and different things.
Right.
But Sherry's pretty slow.
That's true, she is. She's a little bit slower, and she's defenseless, so it's just like Ashley's... When you play as Ashley in Resident Evil 4, it's like the same concept, it's just a little more... I don't know, it's a little more freaky, because you can't really do much about it. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Right. Well, Sherry is an important part of the story. She is the reason that William ends up following them, because Sherry has the G virus. When she talks, she doesn't add too much to the story. It's mainly what you find out from her mother that really gives Sherry life in this story, just as a person.
Sure. Well, I mean, from that perspective, I don't really know much about Sherry. I know that her mom and dad worked in the, they're in Umbrella. Her dad is William. Her mom is Annette. But it's I don't really see her significance, really, other than carrying around the G virus in her necklace. That's the only significance that I gleamed out of the story.
Well, she has a story. It's not really fleshed out, but she was essentially neglected by her parents. Her parents didn't even seem like they wanted children. They just happened to have Sherry, and they were so involved with their work. They just didn't really care too much about her. And it does show. She ends up running around the place, without any adults. They really just didn't take care of her.
Yeah. Ada, I found it funny that she was still she just shows up in the police department, and Leon's just yeah, okay. I don't know, it seems funny to me that I know that she's there under this other company trying to get the G virus, but she has, from Leon's perspective, she has really no reason on being there, and he just takes this without any, hesitation. And then, when he finds out that she is actually a spy, he is just like, what? No way. She's my friend. And I'm like, not really. Like, you've known her for what? An hour? Maybe?
Yeah, Leon likes to play dumb, especially with hot ladies,
That's what it is.
Yep. But he didn't know her intentions, but he knew something was funny about her being there, and they knew each other a little bit. They had met previously, but yeah, they weren't like close. They didn't know each other yet. Although there is tension throughout the game and in Leon's scenarios where you sort of feel like they do know each other deeply, even though they don't. And I don't know. It seems like there's a little bit of a flirting and sort of a connection that way going on. They like each other. They care about each other. But yeah, when he finds out what she's there for, he's clueless. He's like, "What? No. Stop being cute. Stop being a cute lady. Stop."
It's just silly that, I don't know. From my perspective, it seems like that Ada is flirting with Leon to get her way, and Leon's just like, okay.
Well, that was sort of a big stereotype, wasn't it? For for men, even in gaming, just there aren't a lot of men in those older era of games where it's like some hot ladies in front of them, and the hot lady's obviously trying to get some information or something from them, and like 9 times out of 10, the guy falls for it. You know, it's just a trope that they've been doing for a long time.
So, what did you give it for a story, score-wise?
Honestly, for story, I thought it was really well done, especially being a sequel. I gave it a 10.
Nice.
I think it's a great story. I think it's rich. I think it's a huge story because if you add up all the scenarios you go through, it's a really extensive game. There's so many hidden things in the game that no one talks about either. Hidden weapons and enemies. So, and the unlockables. Everything just adds to the story. It's just so good.
Sure.
So yeah, 10 for me.
I originally had it a 6. And I think you've convinced me for sure that it's definitely more than a 6.
It is. So it hurt hearing that.
From my perspective, like, I played it through as Leon, and I got the gist of what the heck was going on. Like, obviously an accident happened in the lab. Everyone started turning into zombies, and William made every effort to contain the G virus and keep it. And playing as Leon, you pick up all these story cues as you go, and you pick up all of, you hear, or you read all of the notes from, everyone who's left notes behind for you to get a gist of what's going on in the world as a whole, or in the game as a whole. Then you play as Claire, and you get, like, just a little bit more story. I don't feel like it's that much more story, but, like, from an overall glance, I'm like, but it's the same thing twice. But as we're talking about it, I agree that there's definitely more there in playing it twice. Like, Claire has way more story than just the same thing Leon had again. So no, it's definitely more than a 6. I brought my score to an 8. I think I'm left a little more confused than I probably should be, and but again, that's playing it through just the one time, if you want to call it one time. Playing it through as Leon and then as Claire.
Yeah, the more you play it through, the more you'll make connections. There's so many connections to make. You'd be surprised.
Sure, yeah, and I think that that's the biggest difference between me and you talking about it. You've played it several times. You know the story a lot better than me, for sure. So for me, having only played it through once, I'm feeling a little more confused about some of the finer details. Like, I get the gist of the story, and sure, it's good, but yeah, I think that there's a lot more to uncover, and it does leave me wanting to figure more out. So, yeah, definitely deserves a better score than a 6. So I brought it up to an 8.
Yay!
I still think that Sherry's dumb, though. But I think maybe less dumb than Ashley. She definitely didn't get in the way as much. Though at one point she took a shower in the sewer, and I'm just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, there's some strange things that happen for sure.
So go ahead. Did you have anything else?
Oh no, I was just gonna reiterate that the story I feel like is one of the better stories in a Resident Evil game. I don't think it's a bad story. I think it's a quality story for a Resident Evil game, which the Resident Evil games aren't really known for their stories, but this is a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and move on to graphics. They're really good for a PS1 game, for sure. They're better than Resident Evil 1. Not by a ton, but by enough that I feel like I notice. Like, the people, they have faces. They're pretty well-defined faces. The enemies, you can see a lot more detail than the first one. Like, you can definitely tell that this is a significant jump from Resident Evil 1 to Resident Evil 2.
It's like they're blocky, but they're a little less blocky.
Exactly. They're blocky, but they have faces now.
Yep. Blocks with faces. But, yeah, the graphics for being a PS1 game are really good, and they were great for the time that they came out. Everybody who played this game was impressed at the time. And if you remember any cutscenes during Resident Evil 2, those were actually pretty decent quality for a PS1 game. And graphically, the PS1, GameCube version, and I do believe the Dreamcast version, all were just direct ports from the PS1. So they all have more or less the same graphics.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really didn't get any overhaul until they did the remake just a few years ago. Which I guess in some ways shows you how decent of a game it was, that they didn't feel like that they needed to spend any time on, doing an overhaul on it until just recently. But, PS1 as a whole doesn't really hold up all that well graphically to this day and age, but for its time, I mean, Resident Evil 1 came out in 96. Resident Evil 2 came out 2 years later. And I don't know, I'm not really sure if I feel like there's a ton of graphical enhancements, but there's definitely enough to be noticeable. Like, they put enough time in, like, the outside stuff. When you're outside the police department walking the streets, there's a lot of, like, trash around, and there's a lot of stuff on fire, and it's just neat to see that level of detail put into it.
Right. And if you look at the zombies, there's actually a decent amount of variation with the zombies on Resident Evil 2 versus Resident Evil 1, and even some later Resident Evil games. They really put a lot into everything, just the surroundings, the enemies, and the characters.
Yeah. The cutscenes, they're not live action this time. They must have realized that was not a good idea.
I love the live action ones. They were so cringy, but they were good.
Me too. I liked these cutscenes, but I could tell that it was PS1 era. Like the cutscenes were definitely better than regular gameplay, but their movements were very stiff and their faces looked very long.
But the
But
skin was perfectly smooth.
that's true, yeah. Very good
Don't need
skin.
any moisturizers, just have to be from that PS1 era.
That's very true. So what did you give it for a score for gameplay? Or sorry, for graphics.
For graphics, I gave it a 9 because it wasn't perfect, but it was still amazing. I mean, these graphics are PS1 graphics, but they're still very playable today. So
Sure.
I think it's a solid 9.
I gave it an 8. Again, really, really good. I don't know. I wonder if maybe I'll be curious to see how Resident Evil 3 holds up. If they do even more enhancements yet, but comparing it to my memory of other 1998 PS1 games, it's kind of normal. Like it's really good, especially looking at it from the original Resident Evil, but there's definitely quite a bit of room that they could have focused a little bit harder. Granted, this game came out on 2 discs, which seems odd to me that they didn't try harder to make it even more graphically intensive, but I don't know. I don't know anything about.
It's such a big game, honestly. and there was unlockables, and like even though the graphics aren't like the best of what we've seen from the PS1 era, when you break it down, they did use a lot of pixels. They did a lot of detail in the game. So the workmanship is there.
Sure. Yeah, they really did take the base game of Resident Evil 1 and just make it better, which is what you would expect for a sequel to a game series. Even the details as far as items, when you can inspect the items in your inventory, and same sparkle. When you're looking at
That's one of my
keys,
favorite things.
It's
Yeah.
so satisfying to rotate those keys on the screen and see them shimmering, and it's neat.
It makes them feel more real to me. Like it's a little more immersive. It's not just a flat thing. I can move around the item and look at it and inspect it and maybe even find, something about it that I have to, I don't know, push a button or trigger something, and then it turns into something else.
Right. Well, do you want to move on to gameplay?
Sure.
All right. Gameplay, I gave it a 9 out of 10. What did you give it for gameplay?
I gave it a very generous 10.
It really is. Again, Resident Evil 1 better. And like Resident Evil 1 already had good gameplay, but then porting it to Resident Evil 2, it's just that much better of an experience. The first thing that I noticed as soon as I started playing is that aiming was way easier. And I don't think that it was so much that I was used to the controls, though I was significantly better at the controls than I was when I started Resident Evil 1. But also the aiming is a little bit more aided than it was in Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 1, you had to be like on target to be able to hit it, where this game was a little more generous.
Yeah. And on this one for the gameplay, I really enjoyed the puzzles. There were some that were more challenging than others, but a lot of the puzzles on Resident Evil 2 I feel really stood out. But there were some that stood out really well in Resident Evil 1 as well, but I feel like they did more or less pretty good with the puzzles.
I would have liked to have seen the puzzles be a little more thought intensive, where for the most part the puzzles in the game were what like you had to have items in a specific order. Like you had it, like you came across a puzzle that needed the lighter. But then, like, how do you get the lighter? Well, you got to go back to this room to get the lighter. But if you don't have it, you don't know that it's in that room. But there were very few puzzles that were like, okay, like in Resident Evil 1, you had that puzzle where you had to mix all of the ingredients together to make that one, like, potion thing for the roots. There wasn't anything, like, super thought-provoking, nothing that really made me have to sit down and think about to solve the puzzle. Does that make sense?
I think this one was more the answers are around, but you got to find them. But the thing is, if you don't know where to look, like in the police gathering room, to unlock the safe in the office, you have to look around at the desks and read their names to figure out what letters and in what sequence
Wait,
to use
what?
to open that. Yeah.
When I came across the safe, there was a note somewhere that said, oh, hey, we moved the safe to this location, and here's the code. And that was it. Like, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Oh, well, it was one of the safes. I'm not sure if you hit it then, but
Maybe I missed a different safe.
But like I said, I feel like some of the puzzles were pretty good. Some of them were easy, though. But overall, I liked them.
Yeah. Yeah, I did too. I only really got stuck once, and I kind of talked to you about it when I did get stuck. It was so annoying. I played as Leon, and this is the whole problem that I ran into. When I played as Leon, I kind of had a general understanding of where the rooms were and where they were laid out. So then when I played as Claire, there was significantly less investigation involved. So I was just like, okay, I know where this room is. I'm going to go to this room. I'm going to unlock this door and I'm going to move on. Well, I got to a point where I needed the lighter. And when Claire doesn't start off with the lighter. So like you have to hunt it down. So it's like, well, where do I get the lighter? I don't know. I know that there's one room that needs unlocked, but I don't have the key for that room. It was the spade or something like that. Well, it turns out, and here I spent so much time. I looked in every single room. I looked at I think I killed every single enemy in every single room trying to figure out what the heck I was supposed to do. Finally, when I looked it up, I realized that I missed a plaque on the wall that was at a dead end. So because I had played as Leon, playing as Claire again, I knew that hallway led to a dead end, so there was no point in going down that way. But I needed the pendant out of that plaque to be able to get the key, to be able to get the lighter. So it was like this one piece that I missed that just cascaded into this big problem and being stuck. But, again, having played as Leon, I knew, that was just a dead end. So I don't know. It was funny.
Yeah, it's good to explore, even if you did play the opposite character's scenario the first time around, because there are little differences. But yeah, there's things you can miss for sure.
I liked how playing as Leon and playing as Claire, like you're coming at it from a different angle and a different perspective. So the puzzles change a little bit because of that. And I really appreciated that. Like you had to, I already knew playing as Leon, I already knew the layout of the police department. I understood the puzzles, but from Claire's perspective, the doors are locked in a different order because you're coming at it from a different spot. So you have to unlock them, differently. I don't know. It made the same puzzle of unlocking all the doors different enough to be interesting.
Right.
And Claire and Leon, we talked about it a little bit. Claire and Leon have different weapons, and that kind of adds to the challenge of the game. Like, Leon has the shotgun, so I was able to go into certain rooms and just blast, enemies away with the shotgun. where Claire doesn't get the shotgun, she gets the crossbow, which is
Yeah.
good, but it's not as good as the shotgun. So like you have to be a little
Right.
more creative and thoughtful on how you take out certain enemies and which ones you just skip altogether.
Yeah, and you have to be careful with weapons and leave certain ones in the item boxes too. Those item boxes throughout the game, because they'll carry over into the next gameplay.
Wait, what? What?
Oh, sorry if that's confusing. So like when you do your first scenario, certain things that you leave in the item boxes will be there in the next playthrough.
Interesting.
Right.
Which item boxes?
You know the big ones that are everywhere that are universal?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like I left a bunch of stuff in there from Leon's playthrough, and I don't remember any of that stuff being in there. I'm pretty sure it was empty when I played as Claire.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not to say that I'm not wrong, but I don't remember anything carrying over. I thought it was fun though that certain spots that I knew that there was ammo might not have had ammo, so then you had to look elsewhere for ammo.
If you take, like, say there's like three packs of ammo laying around, if you take them all, then if you play the next character's scenario, there might not be any there.
Yeah.
So it's good to leave a little bit. One thing that was an enhancement from the first Resident Evil was the changes in the characters when you get hurt. They didn't really have this in the first one. So in Resident Evil 2, as you get hurt, the character starts hunching over and their speed starts to slow down depending on how hurt you are. That was an enhancement.
I liked that a lot because I knew just by looking at them where I was health-wise. So, like, if I'm limping real bad, obviously, okay, I need to stop and heal up. Where in the first game, yeah, there was no indication, so it was just like, all of a sudden you die, and you're like, well, why did I die? I was fine. But this game, you have that clear indication of basically your health bar is your character,
Yeah, it was a smart way to have you pay attention to their health without having a health bar on screen, which probably they didn't want because they were like, that'll look ugly. Let's not have that on screen.
Yeah, they did a really good job at not having any hub whatsoever. Like there's no data on screen for you other than your character. If you want to know how many rounds you have to open up your menu and check how many rounds you have, or, keep a mental tally of, okay, I've used 3 rounds,
I like that there was no hub. It definitely helped with immersion.
Yeah. What weapons did you like more, Claire's or Leon's?
Honestly, I've always had a thing for the shotgun. So, typically I take the shotgun with Claire. Even though, like...
Claire can get to the shotgun?
Yeah.
Oh. I didn't find a shotgun with Claire.
Did you take it with Leon?
Yeah.
That's why.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. See, that's another thing. Depending on what weapons you take and you pick up, it won't be there for the next scenario. But yeah, my favorite weapons tend to be on Claire's side.
So, something that I'm realizing more and more as we talk, we've played the same game, but I feel like we had completely different experiences. You know what I mean? Like, depending on how you play, your experience can be drastically different just within each gameplay. I don't know, it's just really cool. It's really smart of them to do things that way.
Yeah, it's one of the best things about this game. That's why I gave the gameplay such a high mark, because there's so many things you can do. There's so much replayability because you can change it up. And there's so many unlockables. If you do really good, if you get a really good rating, there's different things you can unlock. Like you can unlock fourth survivor mode where you play Hunk or Tofu, and you can unlock extreme battle, which you're fighting a bunch of monsters. But you can unlock weapons. You can unlock weapons with unlimited ammo. It's great. They don't really do this with games anymore.
I mean, I didn't feel like the game was overly hard by any means, although I did play it on like regular mode or whatever. But yeah, like I never really found myself running out of ammo too terribly much. Like I never felt like it was critical. Also, I felt like there was plenty of healing items laying around. So there wasn't any time that I'm like, oh man, unlimited ammo would be amazing. But
Did you play normal or easy mode?
I usually play as normal mode, whatever it was. Like I definitely didn't play easy mode, but I played as I didn't play hard mode either.
Yeah, it's really limited on weapons and ammo if you play harder modes.
Sure.
So it's definitely worth it to unlock some of those weapons. And usually you just have to make really good time on things running through the game. And I think less saves and less healing herbs, and you'll get a higher rating.
Yeah, both of my games were E, which I think is the lowest score if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's A through E.
But it didn't bother me any. Like I was just happy to make it through the game. Now, if I were to play it again, I'm sure that I would do a better score just because I know what to expect and I know the game now. So it's a little bit easier to go through it a second time, probably strive for a better score, strive to unlock some of these things. Again, going back to the replayability of it.
Right.
Somebody... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's definitely more important to play it your first time and just enjoy it. And then after that, sort of go for all the unlockables and everything.
Yeah,
after you've gotten a taste of the game.
That's exactly how I was playing it. Just play it to play the game and experience what the game has, and go through it a little more cautiously. And, I don't know what's in the next room. I could open this room and there might be a dozen zombies waiting for me. And sometimes there were.
Right. There were a lot more enemies in this one than in the first Resident Evil.
There were...
That was another...
I feel like that they were easier to avoid, though, in this game. Where the last game, they were a little more difficult to avoid. And when they got you, it hurt a little more. Where in 2, when they got you, if you were mashing the buttons fast enough, you could knock them over without taking too much damage. And then you could just run past them. But then, if you find yourself backtracking, you gotta face them again,
Yeah. Well, I think the difference with that between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 is, yeah, they both had fixed angles, but on Resident Evil 1, the fixed angles were in much tighter areas in general. So it made it a little harder to notice or avoid a zombie in the next little chunk of where you're going. Whereas, like Resident Evil 2, they had fixed angles, but they had them in such a way that you had a bigger viewpoint of what's in front of you. It was a little easier to avoid some of the enemies.
Yeah, most of the time. There were a few rooms that I noticed where I kind of have to blindly go around the corner, which, again, I'm sure that they're trying to add to that fear, part of the game where it's like, you don't know, you could be walking into the arms of a zombie, and most of the time I was, but it made it more fun that way, and they didn't do it too often.
Yeah. Well, one of the brilliant things about these older, more classic Resident Evils is that you don't always get the luxury of seeing what's around the corner, like you said. You have a fixed viewpoint. What you have to do at that point is use your ears, basically. You're
Sure.
listening for zombie footsteps. You're listening for moans and groans. So you just have to listen, and it sort of enhances, you being on edge, which makes the game scarier. So it's pretty brilliant. Um, well, what was your favorite enemy and least favorite?
Um, my favorite enemy, I mean, probably the traditional zombie. I mean, only because they're easy to avoid and easy to kill. They're slow. Um, the lickers were
Wait,
really neat looking, but they were such a pain in the butt because they're low to the ground. And with their
yeah,
tongues extending as far as they do, you can't really run away. Well, and they're super fast too, so they're just like an overall kind of a aggravating enemy. The dogs were back in this game. I
oh, I know you love the dogs.
I hated the dogs. I still hate the dogs. Luckily, there was only like maybe four. And, oh no, there was a few more when you got to the dog kennel. But I mean, there was significantly less in this game than the last game. The last game, they like spammed the dogs, and oh, that was terrible. I kind
Yeah,
of was waiting for the what are those green guys in the first one called?
green guys.
Yeah, the frog things in the first game. When you
I'm a
make
blank right now.
well, in any case, I was kind of expecting those guys to come back, just because they were such a pain in the butt. So I was kind of happy that they didn't. But I don't know. The least favorite, probably the lickers. Though they were pretty easy to avoid too, but they were still, because they were so fast. They probably killed me the most.
Yeah.
How about you?
I was saying, I'll answer it, but did you notice a lot of times when you were just in halls and there was a fixed camera angle that you got an extreme close up of like zombie butts?
Yeah, that happened a lot.
Ah, it's so good. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. I mean, I I think they consciously did that because they thought it was funny.
Well, and it obstructed your view. So as
Hmm.
you're trying to, get somewhere, if a zombie's in front of the camera, you're kind of screwed, There's nothing you can really do about it.
On those zombie butts, I noticed they put like a mole on each butt too.
I can't say I noticed.
I noticed. Anyways, all right. So, my favorite enemy probably was. I mean, it's got to be between the zombies and the spiders because the zombies are just entertaining and the spiders are fairly easy to get rid of. But overall, I'll probably pick zombies for my favorite. They're just so iconic. They're funny, and you get to see their butts, obviously. Um, my least favorite is also lickers because they were the most annoying. That's partly why I like to take the shotgun with me as Claire, because I generally pick Claire first, and I did not want to deal with the lickers. So blowing him away with the shotgun was always like a good feeling. Plus, just with regular enemies like zombies, I loved holding the shotgun up in the air and waiting till the last second and then blowing a bunch of their heads off, their brains flying. That was always so much fun.
Nice. I didn't do that in my playthrough. I kind of wanted to, but I didn't, like, I don't know that sweet spot of where to fire before they like lunge at you. So I was too chicken to try.
Just
I
takes a little bit of practice.
Yeah. I forgot all about the spiders. I just completely avoided the spiders. I don't think I killed any of them.
Yeah, they're so easy, honestly.
They
I
were,
guess if you have a fear of spiders, then they'd be something.
yeah, they didn't bother me at all. There were a few times that they were on the walls, not so much the ceilings. The ceilings was fine because all they did was spit up on you. But when they're on the walls, they'll like hold out their arms and then like charge you, and that was kind of frightening.
I always think those look kind of funny when they do that.
Yeah, they do look funny, but
They're
they're
just
also
trying to hug you.
Is that what it is?
Yo, they're just lonely. They need hugs.
Ah, dangerous hugs.
Very dangerous hugs. Oh, and the lickers, did you ever get grabbed by their tongues?
I think once.
That is always so annoying when the lickers grab you with their tongues and just drag you.
Yeah, I think I had that happen once.
Yeah, you have to sort of wait to get out of that whole like stranglehold and then fight them again. And they do so much damage to you. That's why I hate the lickers.
And they have like no recoil time. So like you fire at them and they just keep attacking you while you're unloading your gun.
Oh yeah, they're fast.
Annoying.
They're real fast.
I think the worst one is the one in the hallway on the second floor. In the main entrance where like you have that you have the rail that goes around the like balcony that goes around the
balcony inside the police station.
Yeah, yep. There's one licker.
Yeah.
There might be more than that, but there's one licker that guards the ladder, and I kept just like, he's easy enough to avoid, so I would just avoid him. Though as many times as he hit me, I may as well have just killed him.
Yeah, they do a lot of damage. Typically, unless you're trying for like a really good ranking, I think it's a good rule of thumb to kill lickers if they're in your path at all.
Yeah. Did you know that the hallway where the licker is there's that hallway where there's the headless policeman and the licker is up on the ceiling with like dripping blood? Did you know that the policeman's head is actually stuck on the ceiling?
I think I've heard that, but I never noticed when I'm playing. Like I've seen that on like other YouTube videos, but yeah
they cropped it out, I think, for some sort of, it was too gruesome or something. So instead of cutting it out of the game, they just cropped that camera angle so that you couldn't see it. But if you were to like somehow move the camera around, it would still be there dripping. It's just a fun little, thing. I don't know. Something that I noticed when I was playing. I'm like, hey, I remember this. I remember seeing a YouTube something or other on this.
Yeah, there's so many little hidden things in this game. That's, like I said, that's why I gave the gameplay such a high mark, because like even in the first 5 minutes of the game, there's actually a secret. When you start, if you don't pick up any ammo on your way to the police station and you go under that bridge, you'll encounter one like a super zombie.
Really?
And yeah, and if you kill him, you get a special key, I believe. And you get like a really good weapon or item or something. I have tried. It's really hard to kill him. You have to run there as quickly as you can, and you go under the bridge, and if you have any ammo, use it, but you can't pick up ammo at all on your way, otherwise you'll mess it up and he won't be down there. But you have to use your knife and what little ammo you have. But he's like a super zombie, so he does a lot of damage to you, and you don't really have health or anything yet because you just started the game. But like, that's the secret right there in the first 5 minutes.
Is he like a normal zombie? Like, graphically, is he a normal zombie, or is he just like one of the tyrants or something?
He looks like a normal zombie. He looks like a soldier zombie. I forget his name. I do believe he was like part of Stars or something. And he's just like a muscular zombie under the stairs.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Really hard to do though. Like, he does so much damage to you.
Well, anything else you want to talk about gameplay wise before we move on?
I think we have it pretty much covered. Just amazing overall.
Yeah. All right. So music and sound effects. I gave it a 10 out of 10.
Nice.
It's like, again, the base game of Resident Evil 1, but better. The sound effects in the background were just perfect, and you could almost tell exactly where the zombies were in the room and how many there were. But then, like, the voice acting was really good. It was really solid voice acting this time. Aside from Sherry, who was, like, just annoying, but I mean, she's a kid. She's supposed to be annoying. But otherwise, I mean, it wasn't too, blocky in their speech.
Yeah, the first one, I mean, I love the dialogue in the first one, even though it's really bad, but that's sort of the point. It's so bad that it's good. It was definitely a big step up from the first Resident Evil voice acting.
And then the music. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of music in the game. There was the safe rooms, which was pleasant. There were a few rooms that were like, they had this intense music for no real reason. There were a few rooms that didn't have any enemies in it, but it was like, duh, 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 duh. And it's like, there's nothing here. The zombies sounded pretty cool too. Like, when it seems like the last game, they're just like, where this game, they sounded a little more ferocious. I don't know. I think just overall, a good enhancement from the original.
Awesome. I gave the music and the sound a 9. I think overall it was really good. They had good music, and also they had good use of not using music and just using sound effects. There were a lot of areas where there was no music, and you just heard yourself walking around, or you heard zombies in the distance. It was really good because sometimes when you take away music, it enhances the atmosphere too. But that being said, even though I like a lot of the sound effects and the music, I do feel like the zombies in particular are a little cheesy. Like they sound like they're hilarious. They're hilarious how they yell and moan, but it sounds a little cheesy and a little less realistic, but still a lot of fun.
Did you notice?
Overall, I think.
Sorry, did you notice that when you walk over different material, that the footsteps change sound?
Yeah, like if you walk over like metal grating or if you're outside, yeah, it's a little different.
Yeah, if you're walking on glass or if you're walking over like wood particles or something and it has like a crunch noise to it too. Just like the small details that make it all the better.
Yeah, I think they did really well with it. They had some variation in the first one, I think, with sound effects with stepping, but overall, I think Resident Evil 2 did a much better job.
Sure. So, overall experience of the game, for me, I gave it a 9 out of 10. I had a lot of fun just experiencing this game for the first time, and, learning the layout of the game as a whole took some time for me, but it wasn't like, I don't know, I enjoy that aspect of it, of figuring out the map and learning where the zombies are and trying to piece all that together with like timing of when to take out the zombies. Like, do I have enough ammo to kill the zombies in this hallway or not? So I don't know, it just very very well designed to keep me on my toes, and I appreciate that.
Thanks. I gave it overall a 10 because this game really is a big step up, a really big enhancement from the first one. Nothing that they did with Resident Evil 2 was to its detriment being a Resident Evil game. They only enhanced it. They did a great job. The story is great. The music and the sounds are great. The gameplay is great. Graphics are great. And the graphics are over 20 years old, and people still play Resident Evil 2. It's still playable. It's still very enjoyable, very replayable. I think overall it 100% deserves full marks, 10.
Sure. So that brings my score to a 44. And it looks like your score is a 48 out of 50.
Yeah.
So that's a 9.2 out of 10 for the total score between the two of us, which is a really, really good score for a really good game. It does make me really excited to try Resident Evil 3, which is definitely it's on the backlog for sure.
Well, that one... That one is going to be probably a little more frustrating than Resident Evil 2 or even Resident Evil 1, but you'll still enjoy it.
Sure. I don't know. I went into this game thinking that it was going to be really difficult, and then I was relieved that it wasn't quite as difficult as I was anticipating. In fact, when I started playing the game, I'm like, oh no, I'm going to have to start playing this game. Like, I was excited, but I was worried that it was going to be so difficult that I was just going to embarrass myself. But no, I really enjoyed it. I really, really did. And I'm glad. Thank you so much for playing this game with me and reviewing it with me, because doing it by myself is not easy.
Oh yeah, I love playing horror games. I love Resident Evil. I'm always down to play more.
Well, I might hit you up for Resident Evil 3 soon.
Sounds good. I'll definitely do that. That is one of my least favorite Resident Evils, but I will play it. I will replay it.
Well,
I hate not. Sorry, I just hate Nemesis.
We'll see. We'll see. I might hate him too. Actually, I'm sure I probably will.
He's just so frustrating. I like to take the slow route and enjoy the atmosphere in Resident Evils, and it's a lot harder to do that in Resident Evil 3.
Yeah, I agree with this game. Just even finding myself backtracking a little bit and just enjoying like being outside. You don't spend a whole lot of time outside. It's really just like get into the police station as quickly as you can. But like to go back and walk around outside is just kind of neat, to just to look around, and find stuff that you missed the first time through or whatever. I don't know. It's a neat game to just experience even without, pushing to beat the game, just to wander around.
Oh yeah, totally agree. That is probably my only gripe with the remade Resident Evil 2, is that they made the game so incredibly dark that looking around and enjoying the game, like the beautiful graphics, is hard to do. Because the game is just so dark. You're walking around in darkness the whole time. And it's a little bit of a bummer because I would have loved to walk around and enjoy all the hard work they put into everything.
Yeah, that sucks. I was going to ask you about the remake of Resident Evil 2. Do you feel like it's a faithful remake?
Honestly, yeah, I think they did a pretty good job. My gripes with it are very small. Like, the darkness, I feel like it's too dark. Mm-hmm. Like the game, just the screen is too dark all the time. And also, I feel like the zombies are a little too bullet spongy, but they're still a challenge, which is good.
Sure.
But overall, it is a good game. It's worth playing.
Yeah, I'll have to pick it up sometime and give it a shot. All right, well, I think that ends it for today. Jinx, thanks again for hanging out and reviewing it with me. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. The next game we're going to play is Chrono Trigger. So we're probably going to start playing Chrono Trigger soon, within the next few days, probably next week, depending on when you're listening to the podcast, I suppose. But yeah, Kaylee will be back reviewing that with us soon. It'll probably take us 2 months to play that game because it's a bit longer than especially Resident Evil 2. Speaking of, Jinx, how long did it take you to beat Resident Evil 2 this time around?
A few days.
Oh, like how many hours roughly?
Well, if I really get into it during a day, I'll play for like, I don't know, 8+ hours each time.
Yeah.
And I'll end up beating one of the scenarios the next day and then starting on scenario B. So it only takes me a few days, really.
Sure. It took my scenario playthrough was about 9 hours for Leon's scenario, and then a little bit longer for Claire's, mainly because I got lost in the police department. But otherwise, I mean, about 18 hours total for gameplay, which is pretty good for. I don't know. I feel like if I had paid full price for the game, I would have felt like I got my money's worth, especially since there's so much more to do too. So that's great.
Oh yeah.
All right, so we are going to end it here, guys. Thank you all so much for listening to this podcast episode. Jinx, thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.